Welcome back to Stanford Legal, where we look at the cases, questions, conflicts, and legal stories that affect us all every day. I'm Pam Karlan, along with Joe Bankman, and we are talking with our colleague Michael McConnell about free speech on campus. And Michael, you mentioned to me a stunning survey that you had read recently about students at Dartmouth. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, this was just in the last few days, and I think this is interesting because sometimes we think maybe these episodes that make the headlines are interesting, but maybe they don't really reflect a serious problem on campus. So I assume Dartmouth is typical elite small a campus, nothing different there. And the survey asked the question whether, and I'm quoting from it, the climate on Dartmouth's campus prevents some people from saying things they believe because others might find them offensive. And 81% of the students at Dartmouth said yes to that. Incidentally, 94% of the Republican-identifying students said yes to that. So students apparently recognize that their fellow students are not free to say what they want. Now, that is not because maybe some of that is Dartmouth rules. I doubt it very much. My guess is almost all of this is social pressure.
And the social pressure is a problem. Why?
So I think it's because universities are training people for life in a much more diverse world than Dartmouth or Stanford, and to be good citizens. And I don't believe that an American can really survive as a diverse, free republic unless we have some ability to talk to one another. And if young people are obviously the future of the country, and if we're educating groups of students to be accustomed to a world in which some people have a right to speak and other people don't, and where they themselves are really not exposed to a diversity of points of view, I think we are not doing our proper job as colleges and universities.
And I think that makes perfect sense to me if we're talking about people's beliefs on policy issues. So people who believe that abortion is murder, or people who believe that transgender people should be allowed to use whichever bathroom is the bathroom of the group they identify with. I understand why we think it's important people be able to express those views, even if people on the other side disagree with them. And I sometimes wonder about these polls because there's also the things people believe that maybe we just don't think there's a huge value in their saying. I mean, part of what growing up is about is learning that you have some things that would just better to not share. So I take it the worry is it's that former, not that latter. That is saying to people, people of your religion just disgust me. Well, if you know that people aren't going to like that, maybe you shouldn't be saying that anyway. So help me a little bit with how we figure out when this is a good thing and when this is a bad thing, that people don't feel comfortable saying things they believe.
So in terms of the survey instrument, I don't know. I think it would be a very good thing for Stanford and for other universities to enlist our best, experts in survey techniques and do a serious climate survey to find out whether this is true, and also to probe a little bit more deeply, because, Pam, you raise a very good question. Beliefs is a very general term, but there are a lot of perfectly legitimate debates in our society, which I think our experience shows can cause some people to feel offense.
Right.
I mean, even at a place like Stanford Law School where we teach, there were a few months ago posters quoting students out of context, but where they were commenting on a wide variety of matters, minimum wage laws, immigration laws, criminal justice issues, even tort damage calculations. And the quotes were up on the posters, effectively identified. This is a racist statement. Well, I can tell you this is not the way to start a conversation about any of those issues. If students are going to be accused of being racist, which is one of the most potent charges we have in our society today, they'd rather just keep quiet.
This is Stanford Legal, and today we're talking with our colleague Michael McConnell about free speech on campus. Jeff?
I wanted to pick up to try to, on something Pam said, to try to put it in a little less ominous light, though I don't disagree with any of your statements, Michael. Maybe this intolerance of opposing viewpoints and suppression of them is also, as it happens, tied with a desire to be very accompanying of viewpoints of people who were previously marginalized. It has this perverse aspect of marginalizing then the people who were the previous marginalizers, maybe, or that's putting it very strongly, of course. So maybe there's something positive on it that we'd want to keep while getting rid of the stifling aspect. That is, worrying a lot about how someone from a marginalized, poor community, a racial minority might feel is really all to the good. And we ought to think about that, but we have to balance that with free discussion.
Yeah, I think that's probably so.
I think that's entirely right. In fact, I think there are two things that make this more complicated maybe than we've been saying. One, and they both have to do with the history of oppression, that part of it, I think, is that as the tables have turned, that the current victors, who were the victims their groups were the victims not long ago, often have a kind of, to the victors belong the spoils, who cares if those people are now, it's our turn to be the censors. This is, I think, not good. It's human and understandable, but I'd like to see more of a Nelson Mandela spirit about this rather than a Robespierre standard about it. But the other thing is that sensitivities still exist. So it's not as if we're actually in a world with no current difficulties with race and sex and sexuality and other minority views. Those sensitivities still exist. And there are ways in which opinions can be expressed. If you think about a topic like abortion or affirmative action or transgender bathrooms or any of these things, opinions can be expressed in ways which are, quite hurtful. And I do think that everyone could profit from a little bit more thought about how we communicate. But it's important that we talk about how to communicate rather than to shut down whole sets of ideas on the ground that those ideas are themselves sort of ipso facto illegitimate.
This has been such a great conversation. We had all sorts of other topics we were thinking of covering, trigger warnings for one. But I think our time is now running out. So what I'm left with is the task for some of us, which is to think at the university level how we can structure things so that we're respectful to people in difficult situations, but we manage conversations.
So may I just say this brings us back to the very first question, which is how does the First Amendment apply on campuses? And it completely applies, but there is so much more universities need to do than just obey the First Amendment, because I think we are engaged in educating people, and one of the things we need to be educating them in is how to communicate with one another. That is not an obligation of the government out in the streets. That's something that we in the universities have a unique obligation about.
Thank you for joining us on Stanford Legal here on Sirius XM Insight 121.
Do that again, please.
Thank you for joining us on Stanford